Welcome to Super Slabs Collecting, a channel focused on slab flipping, smart grading, and thinking beyond the rip. I was a mutt born in the early 80s, and I grew up at the height of the junk wax era. Back then, collecting sport cards felt simple. You opened packs, stacked cards in boxes, and assumed one day they'd be worth a fortune. Like many people, I walked away from the hobby in the late 90s, convinced I had boxes of future value waiting for me. My collection was stacked with Hall of Famers and big time players everyone recognized. What I didn't know was that all those big time players were overprinted to the point of being nearly worthless. Companies were making cards so cheap they could afford to flood the market, and they did, crushing it for everyone. When I finally came back years later, the reality hit hard. Almost all the cards I thought would be worth money were basically worthless. Fast forward to the early 2020s, and I decided to get back into collecting, and honestly, the card industry shocked me. It was confusing, expensive, and full of bad advice. I made mistakes, buying the wrong cards, grading the wrong way, holding too long. This channel exists to help others in the dog pound avoid those mistakes, understanding the market and making smarter moves with their cards. Sport cards aren't just collecting anymore, they're a market, and once I understood that, everything about how I collect and invest changed. Returning to the hobby was exciting, but it also felt overwhelming. The hobby I remembered barely exists anymore. There were new brands, new products, new parallel, new inserts, and prices attached to everything. So I did what most people do when they don't know where to start. I started ripping packs. And at first, it was incredible. It was nostalgic. It was exciting. I felt like being a young puppy again. Every pack felt like a chance to hit something big. But this excitement, it came at a cost. Because ripping packs, especially modding products, is expensive. Over time, I started noticing something uncomfortable. I was spending a lot of money, and my collection wasn't growing in value the way I expected. That's when the fun started to fade. This is when I stopped ripping packs for the intent of growing the value of my collection and started to pay attention. I started looking at what I had spent, compared it to what my collection was actually worth, and the gap between those two numbers was impossible to ignore. So instead of buying more boxes, I started researching. I looked up solid listings. I studied which cards actually had values and which ones didn't. That's when I started noticing patterns. Certain cards always seemed to sell, certain players spiked at certain times, and most cards, no matter how cool they looked, never gained value at all. It wasn't random, it was supply and demand, scarcity, conditioning, timing. That's when it clicked. I wasn't just collecting anymore, I was participating in a market. Once I started looking at sports card collecting as a market, I knew I needed rules. Not guesses, not hype, rules. That's when I started learning about grading, what graders actually look for, why centering matters, why corners matter, the difference between the grading companies and their respectable grades, and why most cards, no matter how good they look, should never get graded. I learned that condition doesn't just affect value, it creates value. At the same time, I started separating my cards into two groups, my personal collection and my investment cards. One side is passion, the other side is strategy. That separation changed everything. I stopped chasing every release. I stopped grading cards blindly, and I started making decisions with intent. Just to be clear, I still collect. I still enjoy ripping boxes from time to time, but I don't do it blindly anymore. What changed wasn't the hobby, it was how I approached it. Once I understood that sport cards are a market, everything made more sense. Wins weren't random, losses weren't mysterious. There were reasons behind both, and I realized something else. There are a lot of people coming back to the hobby right now who feel just as overwhelmed as I did. People ripping packs, chasing hype, and spending money without a plan, making the same mistakes I did. This channel exists to help with that. Not promises, not shortcuts, just a clear way to think about cards as both a hobby and an investment. What to buy, what to avoid, and how to make a decision with intention. If you've ever wondered whether sport cards can be more than just luck, you're in the right place. So please give this old dog a thumbs up and subscribe if this video resonated with you.